Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather back in 2022 with a recap of last night's school board meeting. Heather, how are you doing today?
Good. So last night's meeting was a quieter meeting, but there were still some important things being discussed and shared. Um, I'm just going to run through them real quickly. Before we had public comment, the board voted on their agenda for the night, for their minutes, and then they also voted on their officers for the next year. Then we heard some public comments. Then we heard a superintendent update where he was really just talking about, you know, subbing and staffing and systems and how thin we feel going into this third year of the pandemic. And then there was a presentation on the calendar and what are we going to do for calendar items. And so the board will be voting next month on the four different calendar proposals that were in front of them. Then they did a bunch of voting. Kind of the highlights of that voting were the legislative agenda and the budget priorities for this next year. So that's my quick kind of rundown of the night.
Very cool. So, while we know the most important conversation that took place last night was actually the superintendent's update around what's going on with COVID and staffing issues and like what's going to happen in schools moving forward, there wasn't actually a deck or anything for us to even point to or refer to around like what's happening and what's going on. And so the second most important conversation that took place last night was the calendar conversation. We've mentioned this for the last couple of months. And they had a presentation to kind of talk about what are the considerations and what are the trade-offs for the calendar for the next 3 school years. And so some of the changes that they're considering, they've been workshopping and they brought it to the parent advisory councils, including the district parent advisory council, along with the Black parent advisory council, the Somali parent advisory council, and many others. And so these were some of the points of feedback that they highlighted around making sure that they want to keep students in school, more awareness and education efforts to recognize events of significance, making sure that Eid is a non-contact day for students, and also ensuring that it sounded like there's some pushback around whether schools should be closed on Indigenous Peoples Day. So this resulted in a really rich conversation by the board around, should we have Eid off? Should we have Yom Kippur off? Should we have Indigenous Peoples Day off? And then they've been talking about wanting to figure out how do we have PD days, professional development days for teachers throughout the school year, not just at the beginning of the school year. So those were, that was like a lot of the conversation. And so next month, the board will be voting on a calendar for the next 3 years. And so if you have thoughts, if you have suggestions, make sure you reach out to your school board member and let them know how you feel around, whether students should be in school, into mid-June, if we add in all these days, or should we keep this calendar relatively the same? What needs to give? So that is the crux of that conversation. So with that, we'll go to our most valuable moment and our do better moment. Heather, do you want to kick us off with your most valuable moments for the first meeting of 2022?
I mean, so last night was Student Representative Gabra Meskel's last board meeting. Uh, what her closing remarks were just incredible. She talked about her elementary school feeling like her second home, about her experience being on the board and how she felt like she was able to participate in decision making. She shared that she's headed to Yale. And so it was just a moment of celebration for her greatness and for all of the highlights. One of the members commented on the deep level of work she's done at South High and the way that she's shown up. What a treasure to get to witness that acknowledgement last
Yeah.
night.
And that she announced publicly that she's heading to Yale next year
So
is
amazing.
super exciting. And I think something that you mentioned that, I think resonates with me is that she should be the rule, not the exception in Minneapolis public schools.
Mm.
And thinking about how do we ensure that that's an opportunity that a first generation American has the opportunity to feel at home in their school in Minneapolis public schools, and then go off and do, whatever they dreamed of doing. And she shared that her dream was to go to Yale, and that's where she's going next year. So that's really exciting. Um, I mean, that was definitely the most valuable moment last night. Last night was a pretty like standard business meeting. There wasn't too much presenting, too much, too many fireworks. But if I had to pick another most valuable moment, I would say my most valuable moment were the public commenters, especially the public commenters that talked about the real need to protect teachers of color before it gets too late. And so, again, as you all know, Heather wrote an op-ed, a brilliant op-ed that was published by MidPost at the end of December. And a couple of parents decided to raise their voice at the school board meeting last night and share like how important it is that the district and the union come to an agreement to really ensure that we protect teachers of color, because they have immense value to all students in our district. And so I thought a lot of different parents spoke really beautifully, really eloquently, but also really fervently to demand that becomes a priority in continuing negotiations for the district and the union. So that was my most valuable moment last night. And so do you want to give us your do better moment, Heather?
Yeah, so one of the things that we heard from the superintendent last night was this real concern around how our systems are kind of really barely being held together. We know that when kiddos are in quarantine, their experiences or their instructional experiences, what's expected of them, it's varying vastly school by school. And it's varying classroom by classroom. And we also know that there's just a lot with everybody, with so many folks from the Davis Center out subbing, there's just not a lot of people left to plan how things are going to go. I don't necessarily fault anyone for that. I just think one of the things that I remember hearing early on was that we needed to have like a distance learning team sort of ready to receive kiddos who are going in and out of quarantine. And it feels now like if we would have that set up, people and parents would know um, like, yes, we're going to pull my kid out for the next 3 weeks while we're waiting for this next wave to maybe peak. And so I know that there's this place that exists for me virtually where I know the plan. And we heard last night from board members, what we're hearing from parents is there's no we don't know what's happening to kiddos. So I think the lack of an instructional plan for kiddos who are in quarantine, who are staying home because of parent anxiety, or who can't get transportation right now, um, I think it's I I think it's dire for students.
Yeah, and not to mention the fact that there are also students that are showing up to buildings who are having to you know take combine their classes in the auditorium or in the gym because so many teachers are out right now. Like, the need for a comprehensive plan is clear. We heard last night that it's a lot of situation based, like case by case, school by school decision making around what needs to happen. And I understand that schools should make decisions based on what is going on in their school community, but also, do we know how equitable that is and how
Yeah.
students are being provided the educational support and services that they need? So that is definitely a concern and something to keep an eye out on. So my do better moment is so I don't know about, again, others, but for whatever reason I'm really into this calendar conversation because it's so interesting, because it does really bring together a lot of values, and we start to have a lot of discussions around things that we value and care about. um, and I thought it was really interesting last night after the board heard the presentation around some of the calendar trade-offs and all of these different things. We heard, that the board was concerned about two things. One, can we create this time and space for teachers to get the professional development that they need, plus the time that we should be taking off so that students aren't missing school for significant religious events, right? Whether that is Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, whether that is Eid, whatever, right? Like, can we create the space so that we're just off for school, so that so many students aren't taking the day off and missing school, and learning either is or is not happening in this classroom because so many students are missing, right? um And then on top of that, we heard another side of this conversation, which is like going into mid June is tough, right? Students check out, families check out, after that first few days in June. And also like school buildings get hot. Like we had to go to e-learning last year because there's so many buildings in our district that do not have air conditioning. And it was a dangerous environment for students. And so what's the balance for that? So all that being said, I thought that was a great conversation. What's a do better moment for me is I'm really curious as to why starting after Labor Day is an assumption that we're not questioning. Like we should maybe consider starting earlier if we want to create all these days. And also we want to figure out a way to make sure that we're not going into mid-June and putting students in a dangerous, warm building. So I think that was a really interesting thing for me. And I'd say the other part of that too is another assumption that was just made and that we're going to not question or interrogate is the 2 weeks off for winter break. So I know families enjoy 2 weeks off for winter break. It's super important. People get time off. I think it's actually more important that there's those 2 weeks for Winter Break Academy for students to get caught up who need
Yeah.
that space. That's definitely an important thing. And at the same time, how equitable is it that we're essentially taking 2 weeks off for a Christian holiday while we're taking like a day off for Eid or a day off for Yom Kippur, and we're not questioning that at all. But that's a fixed part of our calendar, and we're concerned about going too deep into June. So I would just, my do better moment is just question, like, why are we not questioning those assumptions even deeper? Why are we not willing to have a conversation about starting before Labor Day, having a conversation about having maybe only 1 week for winter break off or whatever it needs to be. So that is my do better moment.
One of the board members said last night that talking about the calendar was one of the most terrifying things when she thought about being a board member. And I get it, right? It's like it affects families' lives. And I sat there selfishly thinking about what works for our family. And one of the things Director Caprini said was like, can we pull up 3,000 feet and really think about our district as a whole and like what are the most urgent needs and then how can we plan out? And I thought that was a really great comment. It even pulled me up out of my own position, like, oh, let's think about, what is it like for a family who wants to celebrate Eid to have to pull out of school? What is it like for students who stay in school during Eid? And so I thought it was a great. I really appreciated her comments. But
So in 2022 comes new beginnings and new traditions. And so with that, we are changing our structure a little bit. We'll only be doing a recap video of school board meetings and spending a little bit more time discussing things that seem important. And then we'll be doing another video regularly, not related to the school board meeting necessarily. So check that out. But this is the only video to recap the school board meeting from last night. So thanks for listening and have a great rest of your day.
bye.